Bulwanaka and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to acknowledge the President of the Australia-Fiji Business Council, the newly elected President of the Fiji-Australia Business Council, the outgoing officials, and all the other incoming officials. And I'd like to, of course, welcome the New Shadow Affairs for Australia, John Williams. Great to have another John. Big shoes to fill. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I had a slide presentation, but it's one of those rare occasions where, because we had Parliament last week, I had just had a discussion with the Permanent Secretary for Economy and said, can we just put some of the things together that we normally discuss about? But I'd rather not speak to it necessarily, but I'll just flick through it in any case, because you've already had the, so where do I point to? It's not happening. Oh, it's happening. Okay, great. You've already had the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji. Oh, Governor, sorry, I have to acknowledge the Governor too. You also blend into one with the same colored shirts. Ladies and gentlemen, so the Governor has spoken to you about it, of course, the economy, and you've had the Minister for Commerce, Trade and Tourism also speak last night. So I'll flick through it very quickly and like to have some question and answer session. I've put there the people-to-people link. There's, of course, a large Fijian diaspora in Australia. You've been the beneficiaries of very well-educated Fijians who've left. You continue to poach our people. We understand that this year there's about 60 accountants have migrated. We've had a loss of teachers also to Australia. You are having problems in sending out teachers to rural remote areas or outback areas in Australia. So a lot of teachers have been picked up who teach math, science, physics. The good thing for us, or the positive aspect of it, is that we do have a very young population. 70% of the population is below the age of 40. 65% of the population is below the age of 35. We are investing very heavily in the education sector and upskilling our people. We've made education free, right from early childhood all the way to year 13. We finished high school in year 13. It's all free. It's not even means tested, frankly, unless you go to one of the few completely private schools. There's about 10 or 12 of them. But everybody else goes to those schools that are predominantly run by faith-based organizations or what we call community schools also, and some government schools. That's completely free. We also now have, of course, since 2013, what we have the Toppers Scholarship, which is we pay for people to go and study at university. We pay for their education, there's university fees, accommodation, meals, textbooks, transportation. The only condition is that they have to live and work in Fiji for a particular period of time. So if we've given a Toppers Scholarship to somebody to study MBBS, they have to work in Fiji for 8 years. They don't have to work for government, they just have to work in Fiji. That's one of the conditions. The bulk of the students, of course, and the Toppers Scholarship essentially is focused on areas where we don't have enough professionals in a particular skill set. So we will have a lot of the scholarships are skewed more towards science, engineering. At the moment it's nursing, marine scientists, foresters, land surveyors, town planners. So that's the area that we have the toppers tilting towards. We have a few accounting and few economists, but there's a lot of it. We don't give any toppers for people to study law. There are too many of them. We have TELS, then the other area is, TELS stands for Tertiary Education Loan Scheme, similar to what used to be in Australia when I lived in Australia, called HEX. And again, we give funding for people for their living allowances, etc. They pay us back once they start working, only if they have a job. There's a certain percentage taken off and it's deducted through the Fiji Revenue and Customs Services. If they lose a job or they're in between jobs, they don't have to do any repayments. The interest rate, the maximum is 1.5%. If you come from a low-income family, the interest rate is 0%. If you pay 50% of your loan, generally within the figure of about 3 years, we write off the other balance of the 50%. We've got some bankers here, I see Harun from BSP, and hopefully there are other bankers here too, where we've had a meeting with them where they're quite keen to take them on as customers. So if they do provide the 50% funding for them up front once they finish school, the other 50% of the debt is written off and you've got a good customer. So that's the scheme we have. In this year's budget, we also announced the additional funding in what we call the micro-qualifications area. There's a huge shortage of people, as bricklayers, tile layers, plaster people, in that sort of what generally is termed the blue-collar sector. Huge shortage of people. We are currently having construction companies prior to the pandemic, and now as the economy is opening up, construction companies making applications to bring in workers from Bangladesh. So because there is a huge lack of skill sets in those areas, we've had a number of our trained people, whether they're doing refrigeration, air conditioning, even bricklaying, joinery, carpentry, that left Fiji after the Christchurch earthquake, when Christchurch had the rebuild. So a lot of them went there. So again, we're seeing a shortage in skill sets, for example, in Australia, and specifically in aged care services. You would have seen a number of companies come to Australia. We've got a couple of courses available here. You have an aging population. You need people to look after them. Not many of you want to look after them. Recently, I was in Rose Bay, a relative of mine who's in a care facility. Every single person working in that facility was not an Australian. They were Thai, Afghani, whatever the case, different nationalities altogether. So our people are well known to be very good with children and very good with people who are aged and require, looking after. We have literally a few thousand, in particular women, working on the west coast of North America, a lot of them illegally, some of them legally, providing aged care services. So that's the sort of demand for our people. Of course, we've got a shortage of fruit pickers. We've got a shortage of people in the hospitality sector. You'd have seen a few weeks ago an article was published in New Zealand. There's something like 62 to 64,000 people are required to work in the hospitality sector. Some of the restaurants don't open fully. They only open certain days, open only certain hours in a day. Hotels are having huge problems. So they will start poaching our people. There was an advertisement in the papers here, not coming through the Pacific Labour Scheme, but independently advertising the papers here, looking for chefs with more than 3 years' experience from Fiji, offering from 80 to 120,000 Australian dollars. Now, if all our chefs live, who's going to cook for our tourists? So these are some very critical challenges. And as I said to somebody, maybe we should start charging the Australian and New Zealand government what you call a finder's fee. Because we are actually investing so much in the education sector, we are not actually being paid for that. It is a real challenge for us. For an island economy that recently had the tourism sector devastated for 2 years, government revenue halved overnight. We lost about $4 billion in foreign exchange earnings. It is a significant issue for us. And there is obviously continuous poaching of this, and we need to have some understanding and approach as to what we can do. And indeed, as the Australia-Fiji Business Council and Fiji-Australia Business Council, it'd be good to get your input, your understanding, and indeed your collaboration as to how we can remedy this particular situation where everybody benefits. Some of the information here you'll see is fairly standard. We have the economic relationships, future partnerships. We see a lot of opportunities in future partnerships. I see Ncds here. As you know, Aspen Medical, through an international tender process, has now partnered with the Fiji National Provident Fund in the PPP to look after Lautoka and Ba hospitals. We have certain procedures that are not available in Fiji, even things like open heart surgeries. God forbid if any one of us requires open heart surgery this afternoon, there's no Fijian doctor that can perform that. So there is a major gap in our health sector. And we are hoping, fingers crossed, by the end of this month, Healthcare Fiji, which is the consortium between FNPF and Aspen Medical, will be providing the services to us. From a strategic perspective, just to highlight as to why we chose Lautoka Hospital to have this PPP as opposed to Suva, even though Suva, Nosori, Lamy corridor has bulk of the Fijian population, so over 300,000 people live in this corridor. We chose Lautoka for a number of reasons. Lautoka Hospital has a bit more land available for future expansion. And part of the agreement is that there will be a new wing that will be built at Lautoka Hospital, where they will also be providing what we call a learning environment. We need Fijian doctors to be upskilled and trained. So if we have experts, cardiovascular specialists coming in, performing these surgeries, we need our people to be able to learn those skills, and over a period of time, they'll be able to carry out those procedures, God willing. And so they need to provide that learning environment, a learning sort of operating theatre situation. The other reason why we chose Lautoka, of course, is Lautoka is, people in the West are much nicer, as you know from this Eastern Division. It's very close to Nandi International Airport. You will find that very quickly, you'll find a lot of Pacific Islanders will want to come and access those procedures that are not currently available even in their own countries. So there's a medical tourism aspect to it. The other aspect, of course, is in the future we are looking at, if we have an Australian hospital, Australian certified hospital with international certifications, and if you have a long waiting queue for elective surgeries in Australia, I understand prior to COVID, there was something like a 2 or 3 year wait in your public health system for elective surgeries. Perhaps that can be done in Fiji too. The fourth aspect of it is that, as I highlighted earlier on about aged care services, we have the Japanese who have actually expressed some interest in this area too, of having aged care homes in Fiji, as opposed to our people going to Australia, going to USA or going to Japan, is for them to come to Fiji. The weather is a lot nicer in the West, connected to the international airport. You have you have a hospital that's close by that can provide those procedures. So you have all these sort of the synergies that can provide a conducive environment. Indeed, it's an investment opportunity for those of you who operate in that space or know people who run aged care services to look at Fiji as an investment package. And indeed, on the back of that, you will see that we've provided very lucrative and attractive tax packages for those who want to invest in what is called in Fiji the retirement home space. That's the reason, and we think there's a lot more opportunities, and I'll come to Telstra later on too. The other point that I want to highlight is sorry. Under the SOE divestments, recently, well, not recently, we've been through it for nearly about 3 years, pre-COVID and then during the COVID period. We advertised internationally for divestment opportunities in our energy company, which was, we used to be called Fiji Electricity Authority, it's now called EFL. We corporatized it a few years ago, gave it increased levels of independence, and then we went through an international tender process. Initially, Fiji National Provident Fund bought 20% of the shares. We gave an undertaking that 5% of the shares will be given ex gratia to domestic account holders, people who have domestic accounts with EFL. They'll be given shares. Households that earn less than $30,000 a year will be given 250 shares. Households that earn more than $30,000 a year will be given 250 shares. Will be given 150 shares, sorry. Let me say that again. Households that earn less than $30,000 a year will be given 250 shares. Households that earn more than $30,000 a year will be given 150 shares. So that's 5%. Government holds on to 51%. So the balance of the 44% was what was up for grabs. FNPF bought 20%. Within less than 2 years, they were able to make a huge killing on it. I think they made a profit of something like about in excess about $36 million, and they sold it to Chugoko. Chugoko, which is in fact, it's not Chugoko, it's a company called Sevens Pacific PT Limited, which is, again, a consortium of Chugoko, which is an energy company from Japan, very well known for its renewable energy capacity and technology and know-how, together with the JIBIC, Japanese Banking International Corporation. So that consortium has now bought 44% of EFL. There's no Australian company interest in this divestment. And in fact, in some of the other previous divestments that we've done, there was absolutely no Australian interest in that, no New Zealand interest. When we divested our shares in Fiji Ports Corporation Limited, the Sri Lankan company Aitken Spence actually participated in that. Very well-known company, Scottish company that was formed about 200 years ago, one of the longest listed companies in the world. As a result of Aitken Spence coming into the Fiji Ports Corporation space, we've seen the turnaround times within 6 months improve by 33%. Shipping companies used to charge a levy on containers. They stopped charging the levies because it was very efficient. We've now seen an increase of about 29% in transshipment in Suva and Lautoka, which means the efficiency rates has increased tremendously. And as a result of that, we're seeing a lot more, transshipment through Suva and Lautoka. So getting back to EFL, we are very excited about that. We have a net zero emission target by 2050. There's already a team of about 6 or 7 Japanese experts we met last week who are in the country looking at mini hydros and various other renewable opportunities in Fiji, which should overall, of course, give us a much cleaner footprint. And the reason I'm also highlighting this to you, apart from the national objective, is that you as businesses who may be investing in Fiji, it gives you the edge in terms of saying that you may be generating or producing goods, etc., from renewable energy sources. So it gives you that edge in respect of being able to market your produce, your products, your particular properties, etc. As I highlighted, the amount of sort of damage that COVID cost us. We had over 100,000 Fijians that became unemployed. We had a lot of people that reduced hours. We rolled out about close to $500 million in assistance, $432 million paid out actually in dollars and cents. And the balance of it, we gave various incentives. So, for example, all market vendors in Fiji won't be paying market fees, or did not pay for the last year, and this year also they won't be paying market fees. We're going to pick up their market fees and pay to the municipal councils, taxi drivers, various other public service vehicle drivers whose licenses are come for renewal. We actually pay for that. We know that people normally, when they apply for jobs, they need a birth certificate, they need to get police clearance. All of those fees are now being paid by government. So it gives people that opportunity to be able to participate once again in the employment space without having to fork out dollars from their pockets, which may be limited in any case in the first place, because given what's happened in the past 2 years. Fiji Airways is critically important to us, as we keep on saying that we're an island nation state. If your bulk of your economy is dependent on the tourism sector, and of course you have exports, you don't want to leave yourself vulnerable to a particular critical element in your supply chain where you have absolutely no control over that. We had announced that we will, for example, open up the borders. The Prime Minister had announced last year we'll open it up by Christmas. We opened it by 1st of December, and we had Fiji Airways ready to start flying from the 1st of December. Can you imagine that if we did not have a national carrier and we set out and said we'll open the borders by 1 December, and then Qantas decided to fly in January, Virgin decided to fly on the 28th of December, or Air New Zealand decided to fly the following February. We'll be sitting there twiddling our thumbs, not knowing what to do. So it's critically important to ensure that the national carrier actually remains buoyant. Unlike countries like New Zealand, etc., and many other countries in the world, we have not given any direct cash funding to Fiji Airways. We've simply enlarged our guarantee space for Fiji Airways, and in fact they're doing quite well, and thank God we did, because the bulk of all the tourists that are coming to Fiji, we've seen a huge rate of increase of arrivals. In fact, the Australians now have surpassed their arrivals in 2019 for last month. That would not have been possible if we did not have a national carrier. On certain days, I know in the past couple of months, Fiji Airways has been running about 3 flights a day to Sydney. And we've now just announced that there'll be start direct flights to Vancouver from the middle of November. One of the interesting things also that Fiji Airways highlighted to us, they're now seeing a lot of transshipment also take place. So we're getting cargo being put from USA, coming to Nandi, going on to New Zealand, or going on to Australia, which is really interesting for us. Again, it's to do with efficiencies, to do with pricing. And we see similar opportunities with Vancouver. Just something very simple. When we were there on the ground for about 36 hours. We went on this promotional flight. I saw, cherries, massive punnets at $1, $2 in Canada. It's off-season in Australia and New Zealand, but it's on-season there. So there's opportunities in those sort of areas. So if we're able to, have connectivity with Northern Hemisphere and vis-a-vis the Southern Hemisphere, there's opportunities for us and, of course, businesses from here too. There has been, in particular, if you spend a week in Parliament like I did last week, you come back from a very toxic environment and a lot of sort of ignorance that stems from those proceedings. But things like government debt, you will see that there's a lot of talk about that. All countries in the world have almost doubled their debt to GDP ratios. Australia has, New Zealand has, all other countries have. I think one of the things that you may need to feel comfortable about is that our foreign reserve levels, I'm sure the governor would have highlighted to you, is very buoyant. We made some strategic decisions. Normally when we borrow as government from fiscal policy space, we tend to borrow about 70% of our borrowings, annual borrowings from onshore, and 30% plus or minus 5 from offshore. When COVID took place, we knew that our foreign reserves would take a hit, so we changed the permutation. So we borrowed more from offshore as opposed to borrowing more from onshore. And as a result of that, we saw new money coming in. Our foreign reserves remained buoyant, notwithstanding the fact that tourists stopped coming to Fiji. And of course, it increased the liquidity into the market. And as a result of that, of course, you're seeing interest rates now being lowered. I just got a letter from my banker saying your interest rates have come down by 0.25%. I wish it was more, but of course, there are many people who are actually benefiting from it. And so as a result of that, the point I wanted to make is the ability of the country to be able to do their repayments. And it's your cash flow, like any business. There's nothing, rocket science about this. You just have to make sure that your cash flow is there. I don't know whether the CEO of FRCS is here. No. Was he here yesterday? No. Okay. So Mark is great. We've imported him from Australia, one of those few rare occasions we got somebody from Australia. And he's been great for FRCS, and most of the businesses over here would agree with that. And as Mark highlighted yesterday, our revenue collection is surpassed that of what we had budgeted for the last month. So we're seeing that increase. And we have a lot of capacity to be able to do the repayments. I've highlighted through all of this. Collections first month this year around 130% compared to the same period last year. It's obvious. We're getting a lot more normalcy as far as the job market is concerned. We've had some challenges. I think it was Minister Khoya was mentioning to me last night that he had a laundromat that said, can we, we don't have enough people who want to come and work in a laundromat. Nobody wants to work in a laundromat. So can we get some people from overseas? I mean, this is one of the situations we actually have now. And how do we fill in that gap? We have, as you know, in the budget, we announced that Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and USA now, for businesses, you don't need to have a business visa for the first 21 days. You can come in and out as you like. That's one of the areas that we, of course, are liberalizing as far as the immigration rules are concerned. I'm not sure if you're aware, but last night we did also release a statement saying from the 5th of September, there's no longer a requirement to have any testing once you come into Fiji. So your bookings, or, before you leave Australia and New Zealand to come to Fiji, there's no longer a requirement to do testing. And you no longer have to fill out copious numbers of forms to enter Fiji. There'll be only one single form, which is your normal standard immigration form. And so all of those things are being done. The isolation period has been reduced now from 7 to 5 days, should somebody have COVID. That's part and parcel of sort of streamlining processes, making sure that we become a lot more conducive and a lot more up to speed with what is happening internationally. Inflation, of course, is very much talked about. Our fuel prices just dropped by 50 cents a litre on average from the 1st of September. But again, this is something beyond our control, as you all know. What is really interesting is just reading an article a couple of days ago about the agreement between Iran and Europe and USA. Should they get it across the line, which seems like they could, you'll have a lot of Iranian oil being pumped into the global market, which will see price come down significantly. Of course, there would be certain companies that would not want the agreement to go through because they would lose the huge amounts of profits they're making. So we leave all those machinations that's beyond our control. We let them to deal with it. But that's one of the factors, of course. And, you know, if something significantly different changes takes place between Russia and Ukraine, then that will have a huge impact. But it does have an impact on our people as far as imported food items are concerned. We do rely on a lot of imported food items. We are lucky, as I highlighted in some of the budget consultations, that Fiji has, you know, locally grown sources of carbohydrates. We have dalo, we have cassava, we have breadfruit, and various other fruits, whereas some of the North African countries, in Middle Eastern countries, you know, the sole dependency is on bread, which is made from wheat. And there is, you know, actually bread fights in the mornings. We don't have that issue. But however, there's still a lot of staple items that we do rely upon that's imported. And, you know, it does affect people. So we recently rolled out what we call the inflation mitigation measures, where if you have a child, we give $1 a day per child for 6 months. We've already paid out, I think, about $35 million. We'll pay out $35 million as of the 5th of September. And we allocated about $60 million. A lot of people don't realize that this does actually put less pressure on employers, because we're providing a mitigation opportunity for your employees. So there's less pressure on you in terms of increment of salaries, etc., to meet the day-to-day cost of living. I highlighted the loss of skills to Australia and New Zealand. I think that's already been covered. Geopolitical tensions, again, you know, if you want to discuss that. And of course, climate change. This is critically important. We literally are spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year on this. Some of you may not know this, but just if you get out of here to the highway, if you turn left to go into Nadi Airport, just about 2 kilometers down, there's a massive hole in the highway in the cyclone season we've just had. We had only one cyclone, which is like, you know, nowadays we say we had only one cyclone. Whereas before you had one cyclone, it was such a big deal. But because we had so much rainfall, the ground became so saturated that this highway that was actually built by the Australians back in the 1970s collapsed, just because of the amount of rainfall. So obviously it means diversion of funds from the budget. We do have some funds in the budget every year, but we don't sort of envisage you'll have to spend $20 million just to fix up roads. You know, a couple of the lanes went all together on the highway. So we are building resilience. You know, I have this sort of quiz question asked when we go to members of the public. If you look at the 4-lane road that's built out of Nadi Airport going up to Matintar, you know, the question is, what do you see as different to other places? People say, oh, the bougainvilleas. But it's actually there's no overhead electrical cables. It costs about $20 million more, but he didn't want anything to be blown down. Because 2 years ago, during the COVID, when we had Cyclone Yasa and 2 other cyclones in Vanuatu, there's one particular stretch of highway, where we had to put the electrical cables up or the poles up 3 times in one season. It's crazy. You cannot continue to do that. So we have this program on resilience. We will be issuing a blue bonds this year. Pricing of bonds is critically important. We are the first sovereign state emerging sovereign state to issue green bonds. It's listed in the London Stock Exchange. Great optics, terrible interest rates, in excess of 6%. That's not sustainable. But we have, in the meantime, taken other sort of initiatives. Together, working with the UN, we've recently launched the Parametric Insurance, where, you know, low-income families, farmers, people on social welfare benefits will be covered at a modest sum, yet there'll be some coverage for them. In the same way, we've got the micro insurance, bundled up insurance. I'd like to thank in particular Fiji Care for that. And of course, now with the parametric insurance, we've got Sun Insurance that are participating in this space also, where we provide some form of relief. So there's no huge burden on the government. When Cyclone Winston struck us, we spent $125 billion giving it to individuals to rebuild their homes. Then the following season, we had cyclones Gita, Josie, and Kenny, and where we spent $110 million helping people rebuild their homes. It's not sustainable. So this is why we're looking at, various financial packages and solutions to be able to provide some form of sustainability, including, insurance solutions. Mark is telling me I've got 4 minutes left. Very quickly, I wanted to, I think obviously we managed COVID well. I don't want to sort of labor on that point. I think that this leadership was quite necessary in respect of managing the COVID. We took some very stringent steps, no jab, no job policy. And I can tell you that no jab, no job policy had not been put in place, we still would have had very low rates of vaccination in Fiji. And that helped propel the rate of vaccination. We became one of the highest rated vaccinated countries in the developing world. And now we're actually still leading in that space also. Under the heading of genuine collaboration, I wish to highlight that there's an appetite in government. It has been for quite some time. But I think COVID, if you look at the glass half full, presented a number of opportunities for us to be able to also, negotiate, if you like, with the bureaucrats. So if we suggested prior to COVID to get rid of business licenses, it would have been, some type of, I don't know what would have been the word. It was seen as something very sacrosanct. It would have been, getting rid of business licenses, getting rid of stamp duties. We were able to do that because that opportunity provided for us. In the same way, today in Fiji, we now have individuals who normally would go to a public health system can now go to private general practitioners and get consultations done, get a shot done, nebulizer, oxygen, get blood tests done, renal tests, liver function tests, etc. All of that is done by private practitioners, and government actually funds that, which means there's less pressure on the public health system, which means there's less queues. It started off because during COVID we did not want people lining up at public facilities, for minor ailments. So it's picked up quite significantly, and now we have something like 42 GPs that are participating in this. And it's proven to be highly successful. It means there's a lot more customer satisfaction, we have a lot more accountability. We've in this year's budget also, for example, worked with Fiji Care to develop a software where we're able to track online who's providing what services, and we're able to better manage the patient health systems. We have very high rate of Ncds in Fiji. Most people who go to the public health system would not present themselves to a public hospital unless they get extremely sick. They may have a small cut on their foot, they'll leave it festering, they'll use some traditional herbal medicine, they put leaves, etc. By the time it's about to amputate the foot, then they turn up to the hospital. So as part of this GP facility services, we've also said you can do the blood sugar test. You can go in every month if you want. So at least we've got people monitoring your health without putting a lot of pressure on the public health system. In this way, we're also helping your employees, because a lot of employees actually do have diabetes. In the same way, and the point that I wish to make is that I believe it is critically important for the corporate sector to have a huge stake in this particular space. In the same way I highlighted a number of years ago, it is critically important for the corporate sector to have a stake in domestic violence. We have a specific law to do with domestic violence. If the bulk of the people in this resort are women who work here, they make your beds, they wait on you, they probably cook in the background. If they are being bashed up the night before and they do come to work, what's your level of productivity going to be like? If there's going to be a high rate of absenteeism because they're being bashed up the night before, and generally it's the women who get bashed up in the domestic violence scenario, then what will be a productivity rate like? So it's critically important. You cannot have a hands-off approach. It is in everybody's interest. If you want to look at purely from a commercial perspective, you must be aware about this. You must be able to enforce this. You must be able to have those, those workplace policies in place and contribute. We see a lack of contribution from the private sector in many of these sort of social aspects that we are changing vis-a-vis the laws, etc. Telstra, I put there Telstra. Of course, it's present new opportunities. We've had meetings with Telstra even during COVID before the sale. In this year's budget, you would have seen that we provided about $1 million to look for another landing site for submarine cable in the Western Division. Currently, we have the Southern Cross cable, the next gen now, of course, about $20 million further US dollars has been expended on that. It lands in Vatwanga at Rifle Range. It connects Australia, Fiji, to the west coast of North America. Many Pacific Island countries actually come and connect to the Southern Cross cable at Vatwanga. In order for us to have that level of redundancy, we want to connect with another submarine cable company, and that'll land on the Western Division. What really also propelled us to think about this was the Tongan volcano. So if, as you know, Tonga went into complete blackout, we tried to even call, I remember at that point in time, using a satellite phone, the Prime Minister then, and it's very difficult to reach him. So if, God forbid, if we have a volcano that blows up the Southern Cross cable, we should have another cable that will continue to keep us connected. And it also helps with the BPO sector, because the BPO companies, the larger companies, they give you the bigger tick if you have a redundancy that's been built in. So that's part of what we're doing in terms of the long-term strategy. And of course, we look forward to Telstra, expanding the BPO sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I think just moving forward, as you've seen that ANZ is predicting we'll get a 24% rate of growth. Westpac is in excess of 12%. We are saying about 12.4%. ADB has recently reviewed their rates from 7% to 11%. We'll continue, of course, with the growth in the private sector. We have a competitive tax regime where there's a lot of focus on stability and rule of law, building up that sector, and of course on the niche markets that we are growing. I'll end there because...
Delegates, it's Father's Day tomorrow. 3 young children, Parliament yesterday. He did remind me yesterday there's elections around the corner. I really thank you very much for coming. I know it's a big ask. He even drove here himself. I must admit, he did look like a hoodlum because he was wearing a hoodie and he was driving behind a car and with full of kids in the back. And I thought, oh, who is this? And it was the AG. Look, I'm seriously, I know that you put in literally 12-hour, 18-hour days, 7 days a week if you ask to do so. So certainly from me and certainly from the delegates and certainly from everybody who is associated with whatever you do, we thank you for the tremendous job, the work effort that you've put in. It's really been an incredible journey since you've come into governance, and the amount of effort I've been here for 35 years, and I've not seen a minister put in so much work into his ministries, plural, ever. So again, thank you again for coming, Minister. I really appreciate it.